Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. CMC connects people and ideas through community conversations at forums just like this one nearly every week. I'm Doug Buchanan. I'm editor-in-chief of Columbus Business First. I'm also proud to serve on CMC's Board of Trustees and chair of CMC's editorial committee, the Program Committee. We are so grateful to today's forum sponsors, the Chief Justice Thomas J. Moyer Legacy Committee of the Ohio State Bar Association and Porter Wright, Morris and Arthur. We'd also like to thank today's forum partners, the League of Women Voters of Metropolitan Columbus, and the Ellis, and the presenting sponsor of our live stream, the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation. And lastly, thank you to our live stream partner, the Columbus Dispatch. Every CMC forum takes a village. Let's thank everyone supporting today's program. Okay, so welcome to today's forum, Advocacy Without Animosity, Restoring Civility to Public Institutions. In today's hyper-polarized political landscape, can we still have constructive bipartisan dialogue? Today's distinguished panelists say it's not only possible, it's essential if our democracy is to survive and thrive. To introduce our panelists, please welcome Steve Stover on behalf of today's sponsor, the Chief Justice Thomas J. Moyer Legacy Committee of the Ohio State Bar Association. Steve, the podium is yours.
And I don't have to adjust the microphone. Thank you, Doug, and thanks to the Columbus Metropolitan Club for inviting the Chief Justice Moyer Legacy Committee to present this event. As a member of the Metropolitan Club and chair of the Moyer Legacy Committee, I'm delighted that this is the 6th Moyer Lecture Series program at the Metropolitan Club. And we have about 11 members of the Moyer Committee here today. Thanks also to Porter Wright for co-sponsoring the forum, and Porter Wright was a founding sponsor of the Moyer Legacy Committee. The Chief Justice Thomas Moyer Legacy Committee was formed in 2010 to provide a lasting memorial to Chief Justice Moyer's dedication to the administration of justice and public understanding of the law, including legal and civic education, dispute resolution, ethics, civility, judicial independence, and the rule of law. Over the last 14 years, the Moyer Committee has accomplished many things, including establishing and funding a Chief Justice Moyer professorship at the Ohio State University Moritz College of Law, creating the Moyer Fellowship Program to provide research opportunities for law students, and to date, there have been 25 Moyer Fellows representing all of Ohio's 9 law schools, hosting a 2013 event featuring retired U.S. Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, a great friend of the chief, who delivered an address on civility, but also met with 150 high school kids and 100 law students, and founding the Ohio Civility Consortium, a statewide collaboration of groups supporting civility in public discourse. Imagine that. Establishing this Moyer Lectures series to prevent high-quality lectures and forums to advance public understanding on the important issues of the day. Among the 8 programs we've done some at the Cleveland City Club. We've done 6 here, including the announcement of the Congressional Civility Caucus by Representatives Beatty and Stivers, former White House Counsel John Dean, behind the Supreme Court at the Supreme Court of Ohio, and public trust and confidence in the judicial system, not to mention civility. So today, our program is entitled Advocacy Without Animosity, Restoring Civility to Public Institutions. And we have a distinguished panel of former attorneys general, Lee Fisher, former Attorney General and Dean of the Cleveland State University College of Law, Betty Montgomery, known to me as Betty D. Montgomery, former Attorney General and of Counsel of Montgomery and Shuster, and Nancy Rogers, former Ohio Attorney General and Professor Emeritus and former Dean of the Executive Committee for the Divided Community Project at the Ohio State University Moritz College of Law, and our host, Judge Laurel Beatty Blunt of Ohio's 10th District Court of Appeals. Judge Blunt, Beatty Blunt, is either going to be a referee or a moderator today. So we look forward to today's forum. Judge Blunt.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here today. As you were told, my name is Laurel Beatty Blunt. I serve on the 10th District Court of Appeals, but many of you know my father and my stepmother. My father, Otto Beatty Jr., served in the legislature from 1980, when I was in first grade, all the way to 1999, when I graduated law school. And then my stepmother, Joyce, was appointed to his seat, and as many of you know, she's now in Congress. And I say all of this to tell you all that I grew up with a much different view of politics. I grew up with my dad and Joyce telling me how they would get along with people on the other side of the aisle. They would fight like hell at election time, and then they would come together to get things done in the State House. I saw Steve Stivers sit through Joyce's mother's funeral in Dayton. He did not have to do that. And so I have a different sense of civility. But then we come to modern times now, and we're in a time where sometimes at the conference room table and sometimes at the dining room table even, we seem to have lost a sense of what some of that civility is. But I think from our call, the four of us believe that it's not impossible to come back to a more civil discourse, that we can still bridge gaps, collaborate, and succeed. So I look forward to moderating this panel of incredible public servants who believe that bipartisan dialogue in a democratic society is both still possible, but also indispensable. And another thing that we've all agreed on is that we're all going by first names, because one treat that I get here is, when you're a judge and you're up on that bench in front of people, no one's smiling at you. So I'm enjoying having you smile at me. Also, you lose your first name immediately. No one calls me anything but judge. And so I kind of think, you have like Rocky, Beyonce, Rihanna, and Laurel. Okay? So that's how we're going to set the tone for our conversation. But we're going to start the conversation with a question about a fight. And that was Lee Fisher and Betty Montgomery. You all actually ran against each other, but then in later years came back together and worked on many different projects. And so could you tell us a little bit about how your race went and then how you came back to work together?
I think the victor should go first.
Okay. You're a wise man.
I had the opportunity to know Lee from the time I was in the Senate, and he sat beside me, and I was his podium. At the time, we had things called books, and we had law books stacked up on our desks. And when he was running for Attorney General, he used my desk, piled up the books, and then he and Paul Pfeiffer went at it almost every session. And Lee and I got along well. I was well trained because the Senate was Republican and the House was Democrat. And so we worked together because we had to work together. But we also learned so much from each other. Lee and I think, had I enjoy the race in this regard. It was hard work. As Lee knows, the state is big. But I always thought, I never thought Lee did anything except run his race. And there was now, our staffers might not agree with us, but for the most part, I never thought I had anything but any fair criticisms I got, we responded to, and it was a natural and appropriate campaign. I think just reflect Lee. Lee used humor beautifully, and as anybody who knows Lee, he is very funny. And but I did get the last laugh, didn't I?
Yes. Now, when we were talking, you used a term, I think, that you all campaigned above the belt.
Yeah.
What did you mean by that?
You want to ask me, or do you want to ask Lee this?
I'll stick with you.
Oh.
Like you said, you were
Well,
the
I
victor.
mean, I think Lee made the arguments that he could make and should make as a candidate against me. He made one that I came back on pretty toughly, but I'm sure he felt the same way about me. But generally speaking, it was a race, and it was an appropriately run race, I thought. I do remember passing his campaign bus one time that had broken down, and we had an argument in the car about, well, let's stop and see if we can help him. And then I said, nah, can we do that or not? I do admit we didn't stop.
You did not stop.
We did not stop.
I remember that. Yes. Okay. I had the advantage every time I ran for a statewide office of knowing my political opponent pretty well. Betty mentioned Paul Pfeiffer when I first ran for Attorney General, and Paul and I served together in the state Senate, and Betty and I served together in the state Senate. When I ran for governor, Bob Taft and I had served together. We used to play softball against each other when he was Secretary of State and I was Attorney General. I knew Ken Blackwell, and I knew Rob Portman. I will tell you that when you run against someone that you respect and that you, for the most part, genuinely like, and when I say for the most part, I'm not referring to Betty. I will tell you that it's a different dynamic, meaning that even in the toughest moments, you don't lose respect for your opponent. You want to win, and you make the strongest argument you can, not only for yourself, but what you perceive to be their weaknesses. But I think it is fair to say that throughout that entire campaign, Betty and I had a campaign that was tough but respectful. And I remember when we lost that election, and it was pretty close. It was not a good year for Democrats. In fact, my guess is many of you wouldn't even remember who the Democratic nominee for governor that was year. That particular Democratic nominee was the first candidate, I think, in a long time, maybe ever, in the age of television, who didn't have a single television commercial. Oh. His name was Rob Birch, and he was running against a guy by the name of George Voinovich. And so it was a tough year to run. And Betty took full advantage of that and ran a superb campaign. And when we lost, I remember going to Susan Lewis, Kaler, who's here today, Kim Perfect, who's here today, who worked in the Attorney General's office, and I said, we're going to put together the most professional transition we possibly can. And we put together a really big notebook. Every section chief put together a detailed memo. I did my own memo. And we decided that our legacy was going to be, this was going to be a professional handoff. Okay. Betty and her team could not have been more gracious. And frankly, ever since, I think it's fair to say we've been better friends since she beat me than we were before she beat me.
So let me ask you this. So, the campaign's going on. You all have a decent relationship with each other. Did you ever have a sense that you were losing?
Well, in my case, I was ahead in the polls really all the way up until about the final 10 days, 2 weeks.
Because my question really is, what did either of you do, especially in campaigns? It's someone's job to say why you shouldn't have the job. And so it can be tempting to go low, to be insulting, things like that. But it sounds like you all did not do that. And so I'm wondering what happened when you were either tempted or encouraged to go low.
Well, one interesting thing that happened is that I actually did place an ad attacking Betty for something she had done when she was the Wood County prosecutor. And the reaction, not just of Betty, but more importantly, people who, my own supporters and some newspapers, was very negative to my attack. And I don't think I've ever told this to Betty, but I must make the confession now, that my pollster said to me, "You're actually doing well because of this ad. You need to keep it up." But my gut told me that I had crossed the line and I had gone too far. And so against the advice of my campaign manager and my pollster, I pulled the ad. And I don't know what would have happened if I'd kept it on. But I will tell you that I do think that my attack on Betty was arguably unfair. And it's why I did pull the ad. And I'm not sure I've ever even told that to Betty now, but now's a good time to confess.
It's very civil of you. Did you have something that you wanted to say, Betty?
No, I
Okay.
think, in fairness, Lee was up against a non-campaign in the governor's race and up against a wave of Republicans as the Contract for America, and a more conservative movement was afoot. And so it's very hard to win if the top of your ticket isn't performing. I knew my job was to suit up and be available. You got to be able to suit up and at least take a whack at the ball. And if you don't do that, and frankly, no, I know this is odd, but I always had a sense, when they asked me to run, they were looking for cannon fodder. And we might as well put a woman on the ticket, because at the time there weren't very many women statewide ticket. So we'll put Betty on because she can't win anyway. And so, but I was raised in a family that said, you think positive and you work hard. And so I can remember the first poll we did. Nobody knew me, Lee. They knew you, but I was a zero. And I remember the campaign, the pollster telling me how abysmal my numbers were. And I said, I never expected them to be anything but that. I'm from Northwest Ohio. I'm a senator. Nobody's going to know me. Hopefully in my district they will. But I always felt that I could win. I always felt I could win. I never thought I was going to lose. I worked hard. I was scared sometimes I would lose, but in my heart, I said, I can win this. I don't care what anybody says. I'm not listening. In any campaign, you always have the negatives. And my thought was, I'm not listening. I'll listen to the appropriate criticisms, but I am not listening to the negatives. My family raised me this way. I know what the goal is. I don't care what anybody tells me. We're going to win this. And I had this ignorant optimism that has served me very well in my life. But Nancy has a lot more to say.
You know, it's interesting, though, because when we talk about civility, we oftentimes talk about civility towards each other. But really what I hear you saying, Betty, is you were civil to yourself, too. Because even though I've only experienced a county-wide campaign and can't imagine a statewide campaign, I imagine there are some very dark nights and late nights. So I want to switch a little bit because, of course, Nancy, you served as Attorney General, but there is a whole generation of people in Ohio that know you as Dean Rogers. And so, we are also in a time where, you have baby boomers that want to call on the phone, and you have Gen Z that only wants to text. And so even within civility, you have intergenerational differences between the way people define civility, the way they communicate. And so I'm curious about some of your observations about that from academia and dealing with young people.
Well, Laurel, I'm pleased actually to follow this conversation in the sense that I can validate that about 15 years ago, they had the same spirit that they are talking about now, Both of them, when I became Attorney General, in the first week, made themselves available to me for advice, and solid advice, really thoughtful advice given the spot that I was in. And when I wanted the 1,400 people in the office who'd worked very hard to turn things around, a really talented group, to hear from the people who mattered to them that they still cared about them and thought they were doing well, both Lee and Beatty made themselves available to meet with the annual meeting of the full staff, as well as the author of this fund, Chief Justice Moyer, a Republican, of course, and the Democrat, Governor Strickland. All four of them came and spoke together. Although Lee came only virtually, he was committed elsewhere in the country, but he made time to do that. So my experience coming quickly into government without running as an appointee was to encounter this, lots of partisanship, but this respect and willingness to work together when it mattered for the state. And I think, given that that's fairly recent in the history of our country, that we can still get that back, Laurel. It was your experience as well. And it is important to get back. It wouldn't be so important if other indicators of our democracy in danger were not also flashing. But when all of that happens at the same time, we need to engage. So the generational differences are important, I think, Laurel, to talk about, because what makes people think that they can engage in the anger politics is that there is support for it. People will donate in response to that. People will know them. They will go up and be noticed much more in the social media that young people are checking. They're getting rewards, and what we need to do, I think, is to turn that around. And I don't think there's a generational difference in terms of the desire to do that. So we have here someone who was my student only a year ago, and I'm sure he knows the social media far better than I do. I will say that in terms of the challenges that creates, that we are looking at different media, not only by youth, but also by silo, by choice, watching television, and in other choices that we make. I think that the danger of that is that when we do come together, we have a set of different facts. We're used to thinking of people as the other, and the polls all indicate that we would really like our neighbors to be just the same party that we are, and we're not so sure we want our children to marry someone of the other party. You know, those indicators are all going up, which is an alarm for people like you who care very much about this country. And I think that we need to think then about the media being different. No longer in terms of the relationship of public officials or even campus leaders, can you put out an email and imagine that it will be read by people of all ages, and if it's long, that it will be read at all by people who are used to the shorter. You have to use multiple messengers, people who matter to them, people they trust, and you have to use various media to reach them. But I think it's even more complicated than that, Laurel, because I think that the social media and the texting has made the immediacy so much more important than it used to be. So, for example, you used to be able to respond as a campus leader or a public official within 12 hours, and that was pretty good. But for young people now, that's way too late. And by the time you respond in 12 hours, a whole false media, a false narrative has taken hold. It's going to be very hard for you to shake it. You'll be less trusted. And a whole group of people think you don't care because you didn't respond in the immediacy that they're feeling. And so I do think we need to adjust as we work together to turn around democracy. The other thing that I think is important to remember is that on social media, there are actors who have other motives, and they look like the rest of us. They may be people with a profit motive, or they may be someone offshore. And even the experts on campus can't tell them apart from another student or another resident in the community.
Nancy, don't you think anonymity also plays a part?
Makes it easier, even with email, don't you think, Betty? Even with email, it's easier to insult someone. It's a faceless individual, so that helps build the anger. But the fact that so recently we had such a strong bipartisan, in terms of respect and working together when it mattered, feeling among us means that I think we can bring it back.
What I've seen in the law, actually, that's interesting, I don't know how many lawyers we have out there, but I know when my dad was practicing.
Many.
When my dad was practicing and believed in child labor and made my brother and I work in his law firm, we would have to trek down High Street to go file things at the clerk's office. And you would have to go down to the courthouse to meet with the judge. And now that I'm a judge, we don't do that so much anymore. We have a lot of e-filing, filing things electronically. And so one thing that I would use as a tool, especially when I was a trial court judge, was to bring people in. Because a lot of things that give people keyboard courage, they won't say to someone's face. And I remember one time in particular, these two lawyers were fighting, and they were fighting so much they sent me their emails. And one of them was like, his email said, "I wouldn't wipe my nose with your motion." And I'm like, oh, they've got to come in. They've got to come in, because I had to restore the civility to the case. Because you're talking about wiping your nose with somebody's rights and motions and stuff, but you're not going to say that to someone's face. So along those lines, and along the lines that you were going, Nancy, let's talk about how, 24-hour news and news being online and social media, how has that impacted civility, for better or for worse, in your opinion?
Well, first, I would be remiss if I didn't say a few things that I wanted to say at the beginning, and that is how much I respect these two professionals. Both Betty and Nancy have become great friends, and I can't tell how much I respect them. And Nancy's sort of a model for me how to be a dean of a
I'll
law
be your
school.
friend, too, so we could just fit in.
Well, I'm going to talk about you next, because I met you in the first grade, when you were in the first grade, because Otto Beatty and I were elected to the state legislature the same year. And Otto and I were great friends during the entire time that he served and I served. And I hope that someday you will go beyond countywide and that you will run for the Ohio Supreme Court. Because in the model of Tom Moyer, who everybody loved, all three of us knew him very well. He was the model Supreme Court justice. He really was. Okay, I have no idea what your question was, but here's the...
My question was, people talk about you on Cleveland.com. How do you feel about that?
I think Nancy, was right when she said that we live in an age now where everything is immediate. And I think that there are some good things to that. It means you can clear things up more quickly. At least you can try. You can respond more quickly. But there are probably more downsides because of the algorithms of social media, that we all go into our ideological cul-de-sacs and never come out. And so we see more confirmation bias than we've ever seen, I think, ever, because we tend to watch the news shows that confirm our views, that we listen. We have the same social media feeds that confirm our views, and I'm guilty of that. Even though I try my best to occasionally turn on Fox News, I don't do it often.
And with the algorithms on social media, you have to affirmatively go out and look to protect yourself against confirmation bias.
That's right.
I think, if I may, I think there's a wonderful, maybe the audience doesn't agree, but I am so happy to see that we're taking cell phones out of the classroom. I understand the fears the parents have, but the moment that we can take the social media out of at least a few hours a day and require children to talk to each other, have conversations. The advantage that most of us have had at my age is that we had conversations around the dinner table every day. Values were set, conversations were had, disagreements were made and resolved, usually, unless you were a teenager. Nowadays, we don't have that for lots of reasons, which is another conversation altogether. But I think that the more often that we can be face-to-face, the more often, and I think Lee said it very well, when you know somebody's children and you know your opponent's first name, it's hard to call him a son of a gun, unless you're a son of a gun. I mean, it's the civility, if you've been raised in any way to be appropriately, at least appropriately kind, it's there. I think Nancy is right. I think it's there. I admit to be an optimist. I do think I worry tremendously right now, but I do think the foundations are there, and the desire of Middle America is there. And our job is to make sure that we reinforce the structures of civility in every way possible. I was at our law firm meeting a couple weeks ago, and our partners were talking about we need to have more conversation. We need more communication among each other. And so please look at your emails, respond quickly, do blah, blah, blah. And finally, after I was all done, because I'm of counsel, and these are all friends, I finally was quiet, and then I raised my hand and I said, may I make just one suggestion? Instead of responding to your emails quickly, or just get up, walk 5 feet, look face to face to your partner and answer the question. Have that conversation, because it'll be much more in depth, it'll take less time, and you'll understand more, and you'll learn more. And I believe the foundations are here. I think these kind of events, and at our dinner table, at our grandchildren's dinner table, we have to keep reinforcing the fact that I can't always agree with you. None of us always agree with each other. But to disagree agreeably is important. And that is a learned skill.
Mm-hmm. I think it's also the value that the three of us got in law school that encourages you to know both sides of the argument. I know that has, as the referee of civility, that has oftentimes helped me being able to understand both sides of the argument. And speaking of how great lawyers are, we'll talk about Nancy. I wanted to talk to you about your experience with the Divided Community Project. And for those of you that don't know, the Divided Community Project provides dispute resolution and systems design expertise to help local community and university leaders enhance community resiliency and prepare and respond to events that polarize community. They have been the winner of the American Bar Association's Cooley Lawyer as a Problem Solver Award. And the project helps strengthen local capacity to transform division into collaboration and progress. And so, Nancy, could you talk with us a little bit about the things that you've learned through your experience with the project, as well as some of the things that the project teaches people in the community about, say, hard discussions and times when people disagree with each other?
Sure. We are listeners, and we put together the experience of local leaders, campus leaders, and others, and try to communicate that through simple means, checklists, illustrations, resources. We're headed by Carl Smallwood, who I think many of you know as our executive director. And one of the things that we have looked at is this issue of democracy in danger, and is there a way to watch for warning signs? Because if we could see them, we would try to do something about it. almost all of us. So we met with historians and political scientists, and they generally do agree that modern autocracies come from democracies. The autocrat was first elected, and it slipped with people not really watching carefully until it was too late. And so they have created lists, and we simply accumulated them to try to figure out if we could offer some ideas to stop a slide if it was moving in that direction. And the first one is something we've talked about just now, which is that if the leader seems to engender this kind of anger politics and participate in it, that is certainly a warning sign. Another is a leader who insists on exaggerating how bad things are, a really dark story of how things are, because if they're really bad, we would give up some of our rights in order to have someone strong do something about it. It would be an emergency. And then another is to undermine our faith in independent political parts of the process, public parts, to undermine our faith in election boards, to undermine our faith in the FBI, to undermine our faith in courts, to undermine our faith in library boards even. And when that's happening, of course, there is something we can do about it if we recognize it as another slip. Yet another thing is to go beyond undermining the faith in the public institutions and begin undermining the faith in various civic groups like this one, to make fun of them, to make fun of the medical profession. What do they know about the pandemic? To make fun of the legal profession, to make fun of the news media that still follow the ethics of newspaper reporting. And then yet another, when things get very serious, is for the leader to support armed militia groups. And when that happens, then the democracy is very much in danger, according to the historians and political scientists. And fortunately, our current president is not supporting militia groups, but another sign of danger. And in each of these instances, there is something we can do. So if we recognize it, and certainly we can vote for people who have real character and who are not supporting that kind of a drift, but also we can speak out in ways that people will trust. We can speak out in a bipartisan way and say, you know, whatever arguments we had in the past or whatever contests, we do care about the future of our country. And we want to speak out, and we're speaking out together now because we see one of these things going on.
Thank you. It is CMC's longstanding tradition to take questions from the audience. And so we'll move to questions from our live stream and in-person audiences in just a few minutes. But if you have a question, please make your way over to the microphone now. And if you're joining us online, please type your question into the chat. And so while you all are doing that, I will ask my final question, which is, if there was one message you could leave with the audience about the importance of civility in our democracy, what would it be? Who was Attorney General first of the three of you?
I think it would be, it's a long-term solution, not a short-term solution, but to raise our children with a set of guiding values, with a moral compass, with something that's immovable and is the threshold for making decisions. We recently administered a pledge to our first-year students, and I called it the Four-Corner Pledge, and we put together 4 core values that we said, regardless of your political views, regardless of your views on a legal case, these are 4 immovable objects that we want you to guide you through your time as a law student. And they were professional integrity, civil discourse, academic effort as opposed to excellence, and living justice, because our motto is to learn law, live justice. And we gave each of the students a pin, like the one I'm wearing now, that has 4 dots on it. And we specifically did not use words, because we wanted them to be a conversation starter. We wanted people to go to our students and say, what is that pin that you're wearing? What are those 4 dots? And those are the 4-corner pledge, the four guiding values. The one thing that I don't have a good answer for, but I want to make an observation for, is this. I don't think it's a coincidence that we've started to talk about civility in about 2016, when Donald Trump entered the political world. And I mention his name because I don't like it to be the elephant in the room that no one mentions. But what fascinates me is that I don't think that the vast majority of people who support Donald Trump believe that the best way to live a life is to insult other people, or to be crude, or to demean other people, whether they are disabled or whether they are a particular minority. But I do think that in this world sometimes we rationalize, and we say, well, we like him because of his view on the economy, or his view on immigration, or his view on crime. And we go past these immovable objects. We go past the guiding values and say, well, okay, it's true that he doesn't align with my guiding values, my moral compass, but I believe him ideologically, so I'll support him. If people had a moral compass, and it was a true moral compass, they wouldn't get that far. They'd say, no, you can't get past the immovable objects, you can't get past these guiding values, despite the fact that I agree with him on many of the policy issues. So something's happening in America today where people are sort of putting their guiding values, and they're putting them in their pocket and saying, I'll deal with those values later, because now all I care about is the ideology or his views about certain kinds of people. I'm not a psychologist, I can't explain why it happens, but I think it's because people are abandoning their moral compass.
Betty?
Well, again, not wishing to be simplistic, because Lee's very articulate, but I'm going to revert back to the golden rule. It's a very simple concept. Treat somebody as you would want to be treated. Mm-hmm. And that is a core value. That is foundational. And the one thing
it'll
that
bring you back, too. When you have that thought, it brings you back.
Amen. And the other thing is, I would say not only is it foundational, but or a guiding principle, but it is a foundation against which your activities have to be gauged. I can remember almost every day at the legislature, at the end of the day, saying, measuring what I did, what I said, against what I knew was the core values, and did I fail? Every day, which means that you feel pretty like a failure most every day, because you don't necessarily always live up to what you should. To answer the question about Donald Trump, however, I think that, and I am no apologist for him at all, I do think that what's happened is, in this country, the institutions, the congressional institutions particularly, but our institutions, many of them, have failed the middle class issues because they've been so involved in themselves and the acquisition and retention of power. And so where somebody like a Donald Trump or any of a disruptor gets a hold is when that grievance is unmet, and they meet it, they point it out, they exploded. And so, in fairness, again, no apologist for Donald Trump, but I do think that when we fail to represent the core values and the core needs of our constituencies for a consistent time, and the institutions become more about themselves than the people they're serving, then you allow disruptors to come in and exploit the grievance. And that is something we as a society, those institutions, all of our institutions, have to be aware of. Disruptors will win when we don't do our job.
Participation and critical thinking can be big parts of civility.
And service.
And service, yes. Last but certainly not least.
All of that I agree with. And one more thing is to speak out. I think now is a pivotal moment for us. Speak out. Right now, the president is not supporting the militia. If a president comes in and helps them, pardons them, says nice things about them, speak out, and speak out safely. I think when each of these things happen, find ways to speak out. Speak out to your friends, but if you do it publicly, please don't do it alone. Speak out with someone else. It's also more persuasive if you can be sure to speak, and a good example if you can speak with someone who belongs to the other political party. But speak out. This is a group of people who have credibility. I think I know about half of you. You have credibility in the community, in various communities. And if you add to that and to your safety by speaking out, then I think that warning will help people. In general, people will say they want to preserve our democracy. They want to. They just may not see the signs that there's some danger.
Thank you all so much. And now, Doug, we will turn to you and your curated questions from the live stream audience.
Laurel, thank you so much, and thank you to today's panelists. It's a fascinating conversation. Please do join us here at the microphone if you have a question. If you're watching online, please type your questions into the chat. We'll try to get to as many of those as we can. Great questions at CMC in the name of civil discourse have two things in common. They can be asked in 30 seconds or less. And what punctuation mark does a question end in? A question mark. That is correct. I love our repeat guests. Thank you. No matter your opinion on the coming election, former President Trump smashed many of the political norms established by his predecessors, at least by those presidents since the end of World War II. There seems to be a level of combativeness that's unprecedented in national U.S. politics. Do you agree with this? Why is it happening? And does it have a trickle-down impact on state-level politics?
Can I answer? I think part of the problem, and we've talked about this, part of the problem is not only civility or lack thereof, but it's also not knowing how our government works.
It's exactly right.
And so then you get incivility that stems from ignorance. And when I was growing up in Columbus, we had the Columbus Dispatch and the Citizens Journal. And so you had two news sources that, had differing views. And then also I remember growing up, the news then was neutral. And so now you can watch all this news, watch all this social media, have everything that you believe confirmed, have nothing challenged to make you think critically, and then you don't even know the other side of the argument to consider it, either whether you're going to disagree with it or whether it's going to bolster your own position. And so then I think that that's how sometimes we lose the civility, because our feet are in the sand in our confirmation bias, and we don't think critically about what the other side of the argument is.
You can answer. Go ahead.
The answer is yes, it has seeped into state politics, but frankly, it's gone much further than that. It's seeped into the American society. All you have to do is go to a school board meeting and talk about banned books, and you see people not just engaging in civil discourse, but actually being insulting and rude and not wanting to listen. So the answer is that in some ways, I think Donald Trump is maybe the single most influential figure of this last century, because he has been able to create what I would call a permission structure in society, where people feel like they now have permission to say things they would never say to someone else, but now they feel like it's all right, because if the president can say it, or a candidate for president can say it, then surely I can say it too. I think that's the most dangerous thing, that it's brought out, instead of our better angels, our worse instincts.
Thank you. We have about 6 minutes left, so we'll try to get to as many questions as we can.
Renee Delane, advocate for social justice and ranked choice voting. Can each of you, and we've addressed a little bit of this, maybe you can expand on it, what are your top 2 or 3 values and who role modeled them for you?
Well, I'm fortunate. I was raised in a family that was intact, and we ate at the dinner table at 5 o'clock. We went to church. We talked about values a lot, what was good and bad, what was expected of us. My role models are my parents and my grandparents. Joanne Davidson, who is Speaker Davidson, a dear friend and a wonderful role model for many people in this room. And I just think that history has been a real role model for me. I think that's one of the things in answering the earlier question is that we don't know our history. I do think that the campaigns in the 1800s were enormously difficult, but they didn't have a megaphone. We now have a megaphone. But all you have to do is read anything about Thomas Jefferson and John Adams and that campaign at the very beginning of our country and realize that, oh no, we've been human beings a long time, and that behavior is not new. It's just we have a much bigger megaphone now.
Well, I feel as though I see my values daily in other people and have most of my life. I do think as a country we really share a lot of values, and they are values that we can be proud of. We are a can-do people. We are proud of our creativity. We want others to have opportunity. We don't see from our history that a zero-sum game has ever, that we're ever replaced. Do people come in and we give them opportunity and they become a part of us? And we are, I think, an optimist. We are most comfortable when we are hopeful as a people. We want to treat each other kindly. And in a neighborhood setting, we always do, almost always. So, I feel like I see my values in the people I interact with daily. And I just think somehow we need to regain them for the country as a whole.
Well, my role model include a lot of people in this room, for that matter, including my parents, obviously, and the late Justice Moyer. In terms of core values, we obviously all have more than one, but I'll just mention one that you, Judge, referred to earlier. Stephen Covey wrote this book many, many years ago, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. But the one habit he talked about of those 7, which I think is the most important, is seek first to understand and only then to be understood. Meaning that most divorces happen because one or both couples are not talking to each other, or not listening to each other, I should say. Most wars happen because countries are not listening to each other. And it's very hard to get inside the head of someone with whom you disagree, who's your adversary. But the truth of the matter is that's the greatest skill you can probably get in law school, as you pointed out. And if we could take a pause and before we even say anything, listen and try to understand the other person and where they're coming from, we would be much better off. And to me, it's an essential core value to civil discourse.
We have 2 minutes left for a final question.
Thank you. Marissa Bowers with Ohio Bar Liability Insurance Company and the City of Gahanna City Council. Many of you have worked with young people and with our students. As an elder millennial, I did not get any training on how to interact with people via email or in the digital world. Are there lessons or takeaways that you are seeing from digital natives that you think could contribute to better interactions digitally?
My understand, the question is, how can we learn from digital natives and how to behave better and take advantage of was that what would be the fair of the question? Give her back the microphone, would you, just to confirm? Want to make sure I understand.
Yeah, lessons that we could learn from digital natives about how to improve our communication through email platforms and that kind of thing.
Put your cell phone down. Talk to people. I said, get involved. Sit down at the table over a drink or a meal. And I spend less time sitting and digitizing.
I think that social media is a great way to extend support to people. And when I do see a lot of people withdrawing from public discourse because it's gotten so rough, and just trying to live their lives apart from it. But we do all need support, and so to extend support to each other is no minor thing, and I think now we can do it very quickly.
I think that with social media, the vitriol can just be so problematic. But if you go back to the rule that Betty talked about, you know, treating other people like you want to be treated, when you're in difficult conversations, if you stop yourself, whether it's online, particularly online with keyboard courage and Twitter fingers, but if you stop and remind yourself to treat others as you want to be treated, I think that it can pull you back from getting nasty and make you choose different words to get your point across.
I would say that the best technique you can use is that when you are angry with somebody and you're writing a tweet or a text or an email, send it to yourself and not to that person, and read it several times and then delete.
Doug is back there doing like this circus show, telling me to wrap this up. So I wish we had more time, but like I said, I'm getting the wrap-up signal. So I will turn it back over to Doug Buchanan for concluding remarks. And Doug, the podium is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you, panel, and thank you to everyone for being here today. I think this is the kind of thing that we're talking about. The fact that we're all here today, instead of doom scrolling social media by ourselves, deserves a round of applause on its own. So give yourselves a round. Also want to thank today's forum sponsors, the Chief Justice Thomas J. Moyer Legacy Committee of the Ohio State Bar Association and Porter Wright Morrison Arthur. Thank you to today's forum partners, the League of Women Voters of Metropolitan Columbus and the Ellis. We're also grateful for the presenting sponsor of our live stream, the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation, and our live stream partner, the Columbus Dispatch. And a very special appreciation to today's speakers, Lee Fisher, Betty Montgomery, Nancy Rogers, and our wonderful host, George Laurel Beatty Blunt. Let's have a round of applause for all of them. Please register now to join us right here at the Ellis for our next forum next week. What would it take to end hunger in Central Ohio? Doug, we are wrapping it up, so thank you to everyone. We could not do this without you. Have a great afternoon.